The Valdorian Empire had mastered faster-than-light travel when humans were still figuring out fire wasn't just a really aggressive orange flower. Their crystalline cities stretched across 17 star systems, each one a testament to their architectural genius and their species' fundamental belief that they were the universe's gift to, well, the universe, which made their discovery of Earth all the more amusing to anyone with a sense of cosmic irony. Hexander Prime, the Empire's leading xenobiologist, stood before a holographic display showing the third planet of an unremarkable yellow star, watching grainy footage of bipedal mammals engaging in what could generously be called civilization. His 6 eyes blinked in sequence, a Valdorian expression roughly equivalent to rolling one's eyes so hard they risk falling out. "Fascinating," he muttered to his research assistant, who was busy cataloging the 1000th example of humans doing something inexplicably stupid. "They've discovered nuclear fission, but still believe tiny pieces of paper with dead leaders' faces have intrinsic value." The assistant, a younger Valdorian named Yeth, who still possessed enough optimism to think other species might surprise them, gestured toward a particularly puzzling data stream. "Doctor, there's something else. They appear to have formed an unprecedented symbiotic relationship with a smaller predatory species." Hexander's attention crystallized. Symbiosis was rare in the galaxy, and typically involved species of roughly equivalent intelligence. "Show me." The hologram shifted to display thousands of clips, humans providing food, shelter and medical care to small furry quadrupeds. The creatures did nothing in return except exist in close proximity to their human servants, occasionally deigning to acknowledge their presence with what primitive behavioral analysis suggested was reluctant tolerance. "They call them cats," Yeth explained, his voice carrying the careful neutrality of someone reporting on a particularly bewildering anthropological phenomenon. "The humans appear to worship them." Hexander examined the data with the clinical detachment of a scientist observing particularly dim-witted bacteria. The cats showed no obvious beneficial traits. They didn't guard property effectively, being roughly the size of a Valdorian's foot and possessing the attention span of a photon. They didn't produce anything useful, unless you counted the occasional dead rodent left in strategic locations, which the humans seemed to regard as gifts rather than the obvious territorial markers they clearly were. "Worship is a strong term," Hexander mused, watching a human spend what appeared to be significant resources on a small tower designed exclusively for a cat to ignore. Though the behavioral patterns are curious. Curious was Valdorian for absolutely baffling in ways that challenge our fundamental understanding of evolutionary biology. The data was extensive. Humans had created an entire economic ecosystem around these creatures. They manufactured specialized food, despite cats being perfectly capable of catching their own meals. They built elaborate furniture designed to accommodate feline preferences, though the cats invariably preferred the boxes the furniture came in. They had developed medical specializations dedicated exclusively to cat health, created art depicting cats, and had somehow convinced themselves that the creature's obviously dismissive behavior was actually affection. "Perhaps," suggested Yeth with the hopeful tone of someone trying to make sense of chaos, "the cats provide some form of psychological benefit we're not detecting." Hexander's laugh resonated at a frequency that would have shattered human eardrum. "My dear colleague, these creatures have convinced an entire species to feed them, house them, and clean up their waste, while providing absolutely nothing measurable in return. If that isn't the most elaborate parasitic relationship in recorded galactic history, I'll eat my crystalline laboratory coat." The more they studied the phenomenon, the more absurd it became. Humans had created languages of communication, dedicated to cat interaction, despite the cats showing no evidence of understanding or caring about these attempts at discourse. They had established entire digital networks for sharing images of cats engaged in mundane activities, as if the sight of a small predator sleeping in a sunbeam was somehow noteworthy. "It defies all known models of interspecies relationships," Hexander continued, warming to his subject with the enthusiasm of a scientist discovering a new type of cosmic stupidity. "The cats have achieved perfect evolutionary success without adaptation, improvement, or any apparent effort whatsoever. What made it even more delicious from a research perspective was the humans' complete unawareness of how thoroughly they'd been domesticated. They actually believed they were the dominant species in the relationship, despite all evidence to the contrary. They fed the cats on the cat's schedule, not their own, They rearranged their living spaces to accommodate feline preference. They tolerated behavior from cats that they wouldn't accept from their own offspring. "I believe," Hexander announced with the satisfied air of someone reaching a perfectly logical conclusion, "we need to acquire some of these cats for closer study." Yeth's tendrils twitched nervous. "Acquire them, Doctor?" "For science, naturally. Think of the research opportunities. We could study the mechanisms by which such a primitive species has achieved total dominance over a supposedly sentient race. The applications for understanding parasitic behavioral modification could revolutionize our approach to lesser civilizations." The plan, as Hexander outlined it, was elegantly simple. The Valdorians would discreetly collect samples of Earth's cat population using their advanced transport technology. The humans wouldn't even notice, being far too primitive to detect Valdorian vessels. They would establish controlled research environments on Valdor Prime, observe the cats' behavioral patterns, and finally unlock the secret of their inexplicable success. "We'll treat them well, of course," Hexander assured his assistant. "Proper habitat simulation, adequate nutrition, environmental enrichment. We're civilized beings after all." The irony, of course, was lost on them entirely. The Valdorian Empire, in all its crystalline glory and technological supremacy, was about to voluntarily introduce an invasive species to their homeworld, while convinced they were the ones in control of the situation. If the universe had a sense of humor, it was about to demonstrate it spectacularly. The Valdorian acquisition fleet materialized in Earth's orbit with all the subtlety of shadows at midnight, their cloaking technology rendering them invisible to humanity's charmingly primitive detection system. 3 sleek vessels, each roughly the size of a human city block, hung in perfect formation above the unsuspecting planet below. Inside the lead ship, Hexander watched the operation unfold with the satisfied confidence of someone who had never encountered a force beyond his understanding. "Commence feline extraction protocol," he commanded, settling into his observation chair with the air of a theater patron anticipating an amusing performance. The technology was by Valdorian standards, almost insultingly simple. Targeted matter displacement beams that could selectively extract specific biological signatures while leaving everything else untouched. The humans wouldn't lose so much as a whisker of evidence that their precious pets had ever existed. The cats would simply vanish, as if they had never been there at all. Which, from the cat's perspective, was probably just another Tuesday. The first extraction went precisely as planned. A tabby lounging in a sunbeam in downtown Tokyo found itself materializing in a pristine containment chamber aboard the flagship, surrounded by walls that shifted between transparent and opaque based on stress levels of the occupant. The cat examined its new environment with the kind of casual indifference typically reserved for cosmic phenomena that weren't immediately relevant to nap time. "Subject 1 appears to be adapting to displacement without distress," reported Yeth, monitoring the biometric reading. "Heart rate stable, no signs of panic or disorientation." Hexander nodded approvingly. "Excellent. Their primitive nervous systems are apparently too simple to process the trauma of interdimensional transportation." If he had possessed any understanding of feline psychology, he might have recognized that the cat wasn't adapting to anything. It was simply waiting to see what new entertainment the universe had provided, and whether these tall crystalline creatures were going to be useful for anything important, like providing food or chin scratches. The operation expanded rapidly. Cats materialized in containment chambers across all 3 ships: a Persian from Paris, a Bengal from Bangkok, a scrappy alley cat from Detroit, who looked around the sterile environment and immediately began plotting escape route. The Valdorians had equipped each chamber with what their xenobiological databases suggested were optimal feline environmental requirements: elevated perches, hiding spaces, automated food dispensers, and waste management systems. What they hadn't accounted for was that cats had their own ideas about optimal environmental requirements, and those ideas rarely aligned with anyone else's plan. "The subjects appear to be ignoring the enrichment structures we provided," Yeth observed, watching a Maine Coon completely bypass the expensive climbing apparatus to curl up in the corner where 2 walls met. "Perhaps our environmental modeling was insufficient." "Nonsense," Hexander replied with the confidence of someone who had spent exactly 0 time in the presence of actual cats. "They're simply displaying the behavioral inflexibility common to primitive species. They'll adapt once they realize the superior nature of their new accommodation. The cats, meanwhile, were conducting their own environmental assessments with the methodical thoroughness of master tacticians surveying new territory. They tested the structural integrity of their containment fields by lounging against them at precisely calculated angles. They experimented with the automated feeding systems, discovering that certain combinations of behavior resulted in additional food dispensation. Most importantly, they began mapping the ship's ventilation systems, acoustic patterns, and the daily routines of their captors. By the third day of collection, the Valdorians had successfully acquired nearly 2,000 cats representing every major breed and several that humans hadn't officially recognized yet. The operation was proceeding with the smooth efficiency that had made the Valdorian Empire the galaxy's foremost example of organized superiority. Each cat was catalogued, categorized, and assigned to specialized research protocols, designed to unlock the secrets of their mysterious hold over human psychology. The cats, for their part, seemed remarkably unconcerned about being the subjects of galactic scientific inquiry. They napped, groomed themselves, and observed their captors with the kind of patient attention typically reserved for particularly slow-learning servants. "I'm detecting unusual neural activity patterns," Yeth reported during the daily assessment brief. "The cat's brain scans show significantly more complex cognitive processing than our initial models predicted." Hexander examined the data with growing interest. The neural pathways displayed patterns that shouldn't have been possible in creatures with such small cranial capacity. It was as if their brains were operating at higher efficiency rates than Valdorian computer systems, processing multiple complex calculations simultaneously while maintaining the appearance of complete mental vacancy. "Fascinating," he murmured. "Perhaps their evolutionary strategy involves concealing their actual cognitive capabilities, a form of protective mimicry that allows them to appear harmless while manipulating their environment." What he failed to recognize was that the cats weren't concealing their intelligence to appear harmless. They were concealing it because revealing their actual capabilities would have been about as subtle as a supernova in a meditation garden. The neural activity he was observing represented the cats collectively analyzing their situation, cataloging their captors' weaknesses, and developing comprehensive escape strategies. The Valdorian containment systems had been designed to hold creatures that relied on brute force or panic responses to attempt escape. They were completely unprepared for subjects who approached confinement as an intellectual puzzle, requiring elegant solutions. On the seventh day, the first containment field mysteriously deactivated. The cat inside, a sleek black specimen, who had been observed spending most of her time apparently sleeping, was discovered sitting calmly outside her chamber when the morning research shift arrived. The Valdorian technicians found no evidence of equipment malfunction or external interference. "Impossible," Hexander declared, reviewing the security footage that showed absolutely nothing helpful. These creatures lacked the cognitive capacity for technological manipulation. The cat in question was returned to a reinforced containment unit, with additional security measures. By evening, she was sitting outside that chamber as well, grooming herself with the satisfied air of someone who had just solved a particularly amusing puzzle. The pattern repeated across the fleet. Cats began appearing in corridors, observation decks, and restricted areas with increasing frequency. Each time, security reviews revealed no obvious method of escape. The containment systems remained intact, the security protocols showed no breaches, and the cats themselves offered no resistance when returned to their chambers. "Perhaps," suggested Yeth with growing unease, "we should consider that we may have underestimated these creatures' capability." Hexander's 6 eyes focused on the latest security report, with the intensity of someone whose worldview was developing hairline cracks. 17 cats had been found outside their containment areas in the past day alone. None of them had attempted to flee the ships or cause obvious damage. They simply wandered, as if conducting casual tours of their new accommodations. "Increase security protocols," he ordered. "If these primitive creatures want to play games with Valdorian technology, they're about to discover why we rule 17-star system." The cats, observing these preparations with the calm attention of generals watching enemy troop movements, began Phase 2 of their operations. It was time to see what their new servants were really capable of providing. The enhanced security protocols lasted approximately 47 minutes before the first cat appeared in Hexander's private laboratory, sitting on his desk between a particle accelerator and his morning cup of synthesized caffeine substitute. The creature regarded the startled xenobiologist with the kind of patient expression typically reserved for particularly dim students who had just asked why water was wet. "Security breach in Laboratory 7, Hexander announced into his communicator, his voice carrying just the slightest tremor of someone whose confidence was beginning to develop structural weaknesses. Again, the response from the security chief carried the weary tone of someone who had been having this conversation far too frequently. "Doctor, we've triple-checked all containment systems. There's no evidence of technological failure or external interference. The fields are maintaining perfect integrity." "Then explain how this creature is currently sitting on my research notes," Hexander demanded, gesturing at the cat who had begun investigating his holographic displays with the casual interest of a tourist browsing museum exhibit. What Hexander couldn't see, because Valdorian visual spectrums didn't extend into the ranges cats found useful, were the microscopic fluctuations in the containment field harmonics that created temporary gaps lasting precisely 0.3. What he also couldn't detect were the ultrasonic communication frequencies the cats used to coordinate their movements, or the way they had mapped every electromagnetic pattern in the ship's infrastructure. The cat on his desk stretched languidly and knocked his caffeine substitute onto the floor with the kind of precise timing that suggested either cosmic coincidence or deliberate malice. Given what was about to unfold, cosmic coincidence seemed increasingly unlikely. "Fascinating," Hexander muttered, making notes about potential feline cognitive capabilities, while completely missing the point that he was being systematically studied in return. "The subject appears to be engaging in exploratory behavior patterns that suggest higher-order reasoning." By the end of the first week in Valdorian space, the cats had achieved something unprecedented in galactic history. They had turned 3 of the Empire's most advanced vessels into the universe's largest interactive playground. They appeared in ventilation systems, materialized in restricted areas, and somehow managed to trigger automated systems in ways that provided them with optimal ambient temperatures and lighting conditions. The Valdorians responded with increasing desperation, implementing security measures that would have contained a small army. Force fields within force fields, motion sensors calibrated to detect objects the size of dust particles, and automated response systems that could theoretically stop a charging battleship. The cats treated these obstacles like an elaborate puzzle game specifically designed for their entertainment. "The subjects have somehow accessed the environmental controls," reported Chief Engineer Vex during the daily crisis management brief. "Deck 7 is now maintaining a temperature of 78 degrees with 43% humidity, and full spectrum lighting that cycles every 4 hours to simulate planetary day-night patterns." "How is that possible?" Hexander demanded. "Those systems require administrative access code. The codes haven't been breached," Vex replied with the hollow voice of someone whose understanding of reality had been systematically dismantled. "The systems are simply responding to the cat's presence as if they were authorized person." What the Valdorians were witnessing was the galaxy's most advanced demonstration of environmental manipulation through pure behavioral psychology. The cats had analyzed the ship's automated systems and discovered that certain combinations of position, movement, and timing could trigger responses that created more comfortable living conditions. They weren't hacking the computers, they were training. The breakthrough came when an orange tabby was observed apparently teaching a group of other cats how to manipulate the food dispenser. Not the simple press button, receive treat manipulation the Valdorians had anticipated, but complex sequences that resulted in the dispensers providing premium nutrition supplements typically reserved for the research staff. "They're communicating," Yeth observed with the wonder of someone watching their entire worldview reshape itself in real time. "Not just basic survival signals, but complex information transfer about system manipulation techniques." Hexander studied the footage with growing unease. The cats moved through the ship with increasing coordination, their individual explorations clearly part of a larger strategic pattern. They had established territorial boundaries that somehow never resulted in conflict, created efficient patrol routes that ensured constant surveillance of their captors, and developed what could only be described as a command structure. "Impossible," he muttered, though the word was beginning to lose its meaning. "They're exhibiting organizational capabilities that rival military units." "Doctor," Vex's voice carried the urgent tone of someone reporting a disaster in progress. We have a situation in the main cargo bay. The main cargo bay had been converted into a large-scale habitat designed to house the majority of their feline subjects in a controlled environment that simulated Earth conditions. When the research team arrived, they found it transformed into something that defied their understanding of both cat behavior and basic physics. The cats had somehow rearranged the portable habitat structures into a complex three-dimensional maze that maximized territorial space, while providing optimal sightlines throughout the entire area. They had jury-rigged the automated systems to create microclimates suitable for different preferences, established what appeared to be communal areas and private spaces, and organized themselves into social groups that operated with the efficiency of corporate management teams. This level of spatial reasoning shouldn't be possible, Hexander whispered, watching a calico direct traffic flow around a food distribution area while simultaneously coordinating with a Maine Coon who appeared to be managing the equivalent of shift schedule. The most disturbing discovery was that the cats had somehow gained access to the ship's educational databases. Security footage showed them positioned in front of information displays, apparently absorbing data about Valdorian technology, ship schematics and general galactic civilizations overview material. "They're learning about us," Yeth observed with the kind of dawning horror typically reserved for the moment you realize the experiment has become self-aware. "They know more about our civilization than we know about theirs." The implications hit Hexander like a collapsing star. They hadn't captured a collection of primitive Earth creatures for study. They had voluntarily transported a highly advanced intelligence network onto their ships and given them unrestricted access to explore, analyze, and understand every aspect of Valdorian technology and society. "Initiate emergency containment protocols," he ordered, though even as he said it he suspected it was far too late for containment. "Lock down all systems and prepare for immediate return to Valdor Prime." The cats, monitoring their captors' communications through methods the Valdorians still hadn't detected, began preparing for the next phase of their operation. They had gathered sufficient intelligence about their new environment, established operational control over their immediate surroundings, and identified the optimal strategies for managing their hosts' behavior patterns. It was time to go home, not to Earth, which they had already forgotten as completely as cats forget anything that wasn't immediately relevant to their current situation, but to their new home, where a planet full of tall crystalline servants was waiting to learn about proper feline care and maintenance. The Valdorian Empire was about to receive its first lesson in interspecies relations from the galaxy's true masters of psychological manipulation. The crystalline spires of Valdor Prime gleamed in the light of twin suns as the research fleet approached the homeworld, carrying what its crew still believed were contained specimens for scientific study. The irony was so profound it practically had its own gravitational field. The most advanced civilization in 17 star systems was about to be conquered by an invasion force that had never fired a shot, never demanded surrender, and never even acknowledged that conquest was the objective. The cats had simply decided that Valdor Prime looked like a suitable place to establish new territory. "Prepare standard quarantine protocols," Hexander ordered, as their ships entered orbital approach. "These subjects will need to be transferred to maximum security research facilities immediately upon landing." The cats, who had been monitoring Valdorian communications with the patient attention of intelligence analysts, understood perfectly well what was being planned. They also understood something the Valdorians had never quite grasped: the difference between being contained and choosing to remain in a specific location until it became convenient to be elsewhere. The moment the transport vessels touched down on Valdor Prime's primary research complex, the Great Liberation began. It started subtly, as the most effective campaigns always do. The first Valdorian research technician to open a containment chamber found it empty, though the security systems showed no signs of failure. The second technician discovered his chamber contained 3 cats instead of 1, none of whom seemed particularly interested in explaining how the mathematics of the situation had changed. Within 6 hours, cats had established operational control over the entire research complex. They accomplished this not through violence or destruction, but through the simple expedient of being exactly where they needed to be at precisely the right moments. Security doors remained secure. They simply happened to be open when cats needed to pass. Environmental systems functioned perfectly. They just happened to maintain optimal feline comfort conditions throughout the facility. The subjects appear to have achieved some form of systematic facility integration, reported Facility Director Zahn with the careful tone of someone describing a natural disaster while it was happening around him. They've established territorial distributions that provide comprehensive coverage of all operational areas. Hexander studied the facility schematics, now overlaid with tracking data showing feline positions throughout the complex. The pattern was unmistakable. The cats had organized themselves into a perfect surveillance and control network. Every corridor, every laboratory, every administrative area was under constant feline observation. They're not escaping, he realized with the dawning horror of someone watching their life's work transform into cosmic comedy. They're occupying. The occupation expanded with the inexorable patience of a tide coming. Cats appeared in government buildings, establishing comfortable positions in offices where they could monitor administrative activities. They materialized in public spaces, selecting optimal vantage points for observing civilian behavior patterns. Most significantly, they began appearing in Valdorian homes, somehow bypassing security systems that had been designed to repel armed invasions. The Valdorians, creatures of logic and systematic thinking, attempted to respond with logic and systematic solutions. They implemented citywide containment fields, deployed automated capture systems, and organized coordinated recapture operations involving thousands of personnel. The cats treated these efforts with the amused tolerance typically reserved for particularly energetic but harmless entertainment. Operation Clear Sky has recovered 0 subjects, reported Military Commander Hex after the 3rd day of systematic recapture attempts. We have, however, documented 47 instances of feline subjects observing our operations from elevated positions, 312 cases of subjects appearing in secure areas during active sweeps, and 23 confirmed instances of subjects somehow ending up inside our command vehicle. The breakthrough in understanding came when behavioral analyst Nix made a crucial observation. The cats weren't resisting capture because they couldn't be captured. They were resisting capture because they had chosen not to be captured, and the difference was far more significant than anyone had initially realized. They possess complete environmental control, she reported to the emergency council session convened to address the crisis. Not through technology, but through an understanding of spatial dynamics and behavioral psychology that exceeds our current capabilities. They are exactly where they choose to be at all times. The psychological warfare began in earnest during the 2nd week of occupation. Valdorians throughout the planet began discovering cats in their living spaces, not as intruders but as apparently permanent residents, who had somehow established themselves as integral parts of daily routine. The cats didn't demand anything directly, they simply positioned themselves in ways that made it clear what would make them comfortable. Food appeared at regular intervals, optimal temperature and lighting conditions were maintained, sleeping areas were arranged according to feline specification. The Valdorians found themselves making these adjustments unconsciously, driven by behavioral programming they hadn't realized they possessed. We're being domesticated, Hexander announced during the final emergency council meeting, his 6 eyes blinking in a pattern that indicated complete cognitive surrender. These creatures haven't just escaped containment, they've systematically reversed the entire power dynamic of our relationship. The evidence was overwhelming. Valdorian productivity had shifted to accommodate feline schedule. Public spaces had been unconsciously modified to provide optimal cat-friendly environments. Government meetings now included considerations for feline comfort and observation access. The entire civilization was operating according to principles designed to maintain feline satisfaction and well-being. Most remarkably, the Valdorians were happy about it. I must admit, confessed Director Zahn during his daily briefing, while a tabby cat supervised the proceedings from his desk, our stress levels have decreased significantly since the integration began. There's something remarkably soothing about their presence. The final phase of the occupation was marked by the cats' decision to formalize their new administrative structure. They began appearing at crucial decision-making meetings, not as observers but as clearly essential participants, whose input was somehow vital to reaching optimal conclusions. They established permanent residences in government buildings, taking up positions that provided maximum oversight of administrative activity. The Valdorian Empire, without ever officially surrendering, had been completely and peacefully conquered by a species they had initially classified as primitive pet. Perhaps, suggested Yeth during the final research team meeting, While 3 cats supervised from various elevated positions around the conference room, we should consider that our initial assessment of human-feline relationships may have been incomplete. Hexander, who now automatically adjusted his laboratory temperature to accommodate the preferences of his permanent feline research partner, nodded slowly. It appears the humans weren't obsessed with cats at all. They were simply the first species to recognize superior intelligence when they encountered it. The transformation of Valdorian society was complete within 6 months. The empire continued to function with its characteristic efficiency, but now it functioned according to principles of optimal feline welfare and satisfaction. The cats, for their part, had achieved the perfect evolutionary victory: total environmental control without any apparent effort or responsibility. And if somewhere in the galaxy, humans were wondering where all the cats had gone, well, that was hardly relevant to the new cosmic order. The cats had found better servants, ones with advanced technology and an apparently limitless capacity for providing exactly the kind of attention and care that feline royalty deserved. The universe, as it turned out, belonged to cats after all. Some species were just quicker than others at recognizing the obvious.